Good evening. The October 17th special meeting of the Evanston City Council shall come to order with some feedback up here on the dais. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Ravel.
Here.
Councilmember Reed. Councilmember Hedakaris.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Newsma.
Here.
Councilmember Burns. And Councilmember Sufferton.
Here.
We have a quorum present and are prepared to do our work. The first item on this evening's agenda is public comment. As always, I'll begin with those who signed up in person to speak in person. This evening there's around 10 speakers, so everyone will be given the full 3 minutes. Would the clerk please add Councilmember Nguyen to the roll of those present. And we begin with Mike Vasilko.
Thank you very much. So there's at least $100 million in nice-to-have CIP projects that are not a necessity for 2023. And I'm referring to the list that's towards the back of the budget book, and I think it's a 5-year list. But nonetheless, it adds up to over $100 million of unnecessary 2023 projects. Conversely, there's far too little funds that are needed for the pension debt payments, and we really need to bring the pension debt payments and our debt in general under control. So we should be increasing what's budgeted for the debt payments for pensions. Our city debt is ever increasing. At the same time, inflation is rising, and economists around the world are calculating how big and how bad the upcoming recession in 2023 will be, because that seems to be a reality. So I'm asking, stop issuing GO bonds, stop digging a deeper debt hole. Despite all the pomp and circumstances and celebrations of passing a unanimous climate emergency resolution in April of earlier this year, the proposed 2023 budget contains barely a whisper of climate action funding. I wrote to each of you asking that you create a real climate action fund. It's not to minimize the efforts of Kara and the committee, the environmental committee. They're doing a great job. They're just not getting the support they need, and they need a much larger fund to address immediate climate action items. This fund is intended to be available to the residents who want to take climate action but can't afford to do so. So we need a significant and measurable difference in how we approach climate action. The tip of the spear when it comes to climate action is the elimination of the use of fossil fuels. It's really that simple. Change to other sources of heating and cooling for mechanical equipment, change to electric vehicles versus gasoline combustion engines for cars and trucks. Please significantly increase the Climate Action Fund and ask questions about these projects we have in the CIP. Are the building projects and the renovation projects
15 seconds.
being engineered to be net zero projects? No fossil fuels in these buildings? Is the proposed animal shelter for $6.3 million a net zero building? Does the $31 million service center improvements include creating a non-zero building? And so on and so on. So please address the climate action.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ray Friedman.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I missed like the last 3 council meetings, but Luke Stowe has given me 3 public comment slots because I missed those, just so you know. First, I'd like to say congratulations to Shanita Stewart on being sworn in as new police chief. I wanted to be here last Monday, but because of the popularity of Shanita, there was no parking in the lot whatsoever. so I had to leave. I've never seen that before. Good job, Shanita. Now about the budget. We recently did a parking study for downtown Evanston, which showed that parking fees should be increased. Then you decided not to follow the advice of that study to increase rates. I'm not going to ask why. It was a bad idea for the study, and it was even a worse idea to raise parking rates downtown. So how much did the study cost? How many studies with independent contractors have we done in 2022, and what was the cost of those studies? How many consultants with independent contractors have we used in 2022, and what was the cost of those consultants? Now, looking over the goals for City Council from 2019 through 2022, there were 6 goals. Number 5 was to stabilize long-term city finances. So why are we spending money that we don't have? We need a study to show how many employees it should take to run a city of Evanston's size. I know you did a study for how much employees should make. Why not do a study that shows how many employees these similar communities, towns, cities have? Do we need 800 to 900 employees plus another 200 volunteers? We would think the number of volunteers would cut down the number of employees needed. In an average city or municipality of our size, how many departments, committees, and commissions are typically used to run that community? How many of these groups make binding decisions? What is the purpose of a committee and a subcommittee if neither one makes a binding decision? You are really doing a disservice to yourselves and to the community by leaving residents out of the discussions and the process in making these critical decisions. Residents need to be involved with all wards to stay informed, but once again on 10/27, next Thursday, there's 4 ward meetings scheduled within an hour of each other, 1 at 6 and 3 at 7 o'clock. So how are all
15
78,000 residents able to participate in all those ward meetings? We need to know, the residents need to know what's going on in the whole community, not just one ward. So please come up with a system to address all public comments.
Time.
The residents need your input on all of our questions and concerns.
Thank you very
That was just my
much.
first public comment. I have 2 more. All right,
Thank you very much.
to be continued.
This concludes those who signed up in person. So we now move, as per usual, to those who signed up online to speak in person. And there we have Neil Gambow.
Good evening. I'm the chair of the Mayor's Employer Advisory Council, as some, if not most of you know. And I've been around workforce development around this city for about 4.5 years. And I'm here today to offer support for the proposal for workforce development expansion within the city budget submitted by Ike Ogbo. What I've learned in the last 4.5 years is, we've done a great job with the high school, great, but the whole population that we're missing is the 18 plus. This is a population that suffers from the notion that they are slowly leaving Evanston because they can't afford to live here. And the real issue is, let's get a program going so we can offer the skills training and the employment opportunities for these people so they can do this in the city and stay here. I know that we've got the tools to do it. I've seen some really successful programs. You all know about Aspire. It's wildly successful. We've got another one called Emerge that's coming along in the process and whatnot. But we also have Oakton Community College, you've got Evanston Rebuilding Warehouse, you've got a number of other training things. But we need to get the next step of allowing these people to get the information about opportunities within the city. And a lot of these people have a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to access that information. So I think the proposal in the budget solves that problem. It's well thought out, because I will say that this is not one that's just kind of a whim thing. And this is what I call a low-cost, high-return opportunity. We're not really talking a lot of money here, but the impact, think of the impact of the people that are being forced out of here, that maybe if they could come to the city have access to some information. And again, the city's not going to do all the work. The city's just going to gather the information, the resources, and be able to help point these people to, have you thought of this? What are you interested in? How can I help you? And I think the opportunity here, we've got a changing city all the time. We've got new things coming into the city. You've got Northlight Theater. You've got the Northwestern NU's Entrepreneur Center. You've got new medical facilities coming into the town. We got plenty of opportunities, but these require skills on the part of the people. You just don't show up and just hope you get a job. So again, I support that proposal, well thought out, and we really think we need to do something as a city because we're the only ones with enough horsepower to do it.
Thank you very much. We now move to the online speakers, who will be beginning with Brian Bekaris, who will be followed by Mary Rosinski and then Carlos Sutton.
Hello, I'm Brian Bekaris, and I want to thank the council, Mr. Mayor, and concerned citizens for allowing me an opportunity to bend your ear about fiscal responsibility. I'm a lifetime resident of Southeast Evanston, and I really enjoy being an Evanstonian, but I feel that it's becoming harder and harder for people to remain in Evanston because of the escalating costs of lots of things. I'm very concerned with the escalating costs with civic projects like the recently completed Crown Ice Rink and Community Center, which was presented as a $28 million project to the people of Evanston and ended up being north of 60 million. Also, there's some proposal by some to sell the current Civic Center and to developers and replace it with some kind of a facility in downtown Evanston. And I can only imagine that this is going to be a project that'll be $50 to $100 million more. And I ask why. We've got a beautiful 8-acre park-like setting. Let's fix it and make it something we can all be proud of. Another thing that is very concerning to me is a $6.3 million animal shelter. You think about what the current facility is, maybe 2,500 square feet, and then the replacement will be 8,000 square feet for $6.3 million. When you extrapolate the cost per square foot, that's nearly $800 a square foot. And this isn't some hotel in Telluride. This is Evanston, Illinois, where people care about nice but don't need extravagant. And lastly, there's a beautiful facility right next door. Why don't we renovate the former recycling center and have an indoor dog run and a beautiful new facilities for managing and caring for animals in the course of what has become a community model to foster them, not to contain them. Anyway, that's all that's on my mind immediately. I am grateful for your attention and thank you for your hard work in this community.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mary Rosinski, who will be followed by Carlos Sutton and then Tricia Connolly. Is Ms. Rosinski in the Zoom? Do we know? All right, we'll come back to her later. The next speaker then will be Carlos Sutton, who will be followed by Tricia Connolly and then Kathy Hayes. All right, we'll move on then. The next speaker then is Tricia Connolly, who will be followed by Kathy Hayes and then Darlene Cannon.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager. Tonight, I would like to ask our new City Manager, Luke Stowe, to send notice to all city staff of the importance of prioritizing projects and what we must do versus what we'd like to do. First and foremost in this communication is to have staff understand that our city tax levy is just one part of the many taxing bodies residents are having to give money to every year. If this message was taken in, I believe quite a few of these projects proposed in this budget would not be discussed tonight. If a high priority goal is that we want Evanston to be a place where people get to live rather than have to be faced with leaving, then let's work to achieve that goal. Fountain Square. Folks, let's let it go. Why would we spend money on repair when we are litigating on the work that's being done on this? That's ridiculous. It makes no sense to me as a taxpayer. Let's continue to find creative ways to use this as a public space while the repair is being litigated. It is not in the public's best interest to spend money on this now. Secondly, it's unclear if all the recommended staffing from Baker and Tilly is listed in the budget document. There are some positions listed that were not recommended by Baker and Tilly from what I looked at. Why is this? Why did we spend $145,000 to hire a consultant to tell us where our staffing need was if we're just going to do and follow what staff is directing? That is not a good idea. Thank you for your time. I know this is difficult discussions and difficult choices to make, but we can do this. And for goodness sakes, don't raise a dime in taxes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Kathy Hayes, who will be followed by Darlene Cannon.
Thank you so much, Mayor. My name is Kathy Hayes, and I'm from the 9th Ward. Budgets are very difficult for everyone to understand and grasp and wrestle with. My hope is that these community meetings will be an educational opportunity for all residents to be able to understand how city management works. My question this evening is a pretty simple one. In going through this 500-page document, there was an issue regarding a $700,000 fleet expense. I was wondering if this was the free fire truck that we were supposed to be getting as a gift from NU, but then I see it repeated again at $750,000. So I was a bit confused as I was going through the papers. I'm also interested in the timing of many of the projects that are going to happen so that we don't duplicate or have to duplicate services in fixing a water pipe and then tearing up the street again, or having a corridor repair to just have to go back again and redo and redig. So my hope is that these conversations that are coming up for community meetings regarding the budget, as difficult as they are, as tedious as they might be, will be an opportunity of education for everyone, both staff, government, and resident. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Darlene Cannon.
Good evening, all. I'm Darlene Cannon, 2nd Ward. The proposed budget increase of $42.1 million, I question why. Is the city staff understanding that there is a real likelihood of a recession next year? What direction was given from upper management and council in regards to this budget? Was it based on the needs of our most vulnerable residents, and was a lens of equity used when the budget was created? It appears not, because after not raising taxes last year, we are willing to raise taxes following our 19th year of a tax increase. And, you know, an extra $82.45 per household on top of paying the highest sales tax rates in the state, increased wheel taxes, increased parking rates, tickets, and all sorts of other regressive taxes is enough. I also want to say that, you know, I agree with Mike that we should be increasing our pension payments since we appear to be so far behind. And overall, a simple solution is to cut the budget and center the residents and have a budget that's focused on the needs of this community and not simply what is wanted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now return to those who were called on but weren't able to enter the Zoom, beginning with Mary Rosinski and then followed by Carla Sutton. Ms. Rosinski?
Hi, thank you very much. I also have some concerns about this budget and how inflated it seems to have become without much discussion. My biggest concern actually has to do with the capital improvements. On September 27th, we did hear from Laura Biggs about all these projects that she wanted to kind of put out there, but we shouldn't be doing anything on the Civic Center until we also know what has been done on the Civic Center, because there seems to be a question of if the records going back a number of years are available. But we're also in the process of evaluating it, and I don't understand $3 million to replace windows. I think we need to have backup information that says what windows can be fixed and what's wrong with them. It's just that there's a lot of things that just seem like if you had an endless source of money, I'd like new windows too, but it's not in my budget. And I think that's what we really need to look at with our city. And I know there's people that are concerned about this, and I think many of you are concerned about it. The pension, everyone is being told, get out of your debt, don't be paying debt, don't be paying high interest. We need to get 100% on our pension. The other thing is like the animal shelter, and I can see that we will need a new animal shelter. I do not think we need to be paying $714 a square foot for an animal shelter. I think we need to go back to sharpen our pencils on a lot of these projects. And I love parks. I live for parks, but to go from $3 million to $9 million on parks without a backup information just kind of being dumped in there, I think maybe we might have to extend that over a larger period of time and see what needs to be done. The parks, it has an evaluation coming up in the next month or so. So it seems premature to set aside that much money, especially since maintenance of the facilities like our programming facilities like noise and whatnot aren't in there. Also going back to, I'm jumping back to the Civic Center, all of a sudden I think it's like $2 million for tuck pointing, but there are things that were in last year's capital improvement budget for the Civic Center that are in now and were not in there last year. And tuck pointing doesn't become a major issue overnight. It's something that gradually happens. So I'm going to, say that, just like, look at this. We need to trim it down. We need to get it right. And we need to figure out, like everyone else is saying, what has to be done that would be wasteful if we didn't do it. And what are the projects that can wait until we have more money. Thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you very much. The final speaker is Carla Sutton.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Best and members of the City Council. I have three concerns that I would like for you to address. One, in the capital improvements. I went through the list and I don't see my alley as being completed. I'm very concerned because I was in the targeted area from the lawsuit of the transfer station that said alleys within a certain perimeter of the transfer station would be paved. Now you've paved the alley in the 1500 block of Darrell, the 1600 block on Darrell, the 1700 block on Darrell. Then when you get to my house, you give me two conflicting statements. One, that you needed permission from Con Ed to repair the alley. And secondly, you blocked my alley off on September 19th. And I didn't see any movement until today with cement trucks about any completion. And I'm more concerned that my neighbor said the alley will not be paved, it will just be blacktop. That will mean continuing improvements every winter when these big trucks come up and down the alley, that blacktop will probably last just one season. Why is my alley the only one behind the 1800 block on Darrell East being blacktop and not paved? Secondly, I see the concern that you're putting $1 million in repairing floors for Robert Crown. To me, that is the biggest white elephant that the city of Evanston has ever invested in, and it doesn't seem to have any redeeming features with majority of the members of the community. And last, you will be discussing eventually payment to small landlords. Why is it that we have to show our income tax returns for the minimum amount of $12,000 and the maximum of $15,000 when all business people or entrepreneurs on Main Street received a check for $50,000, and I didn't see any proof that they had to show their tax records, document their loss? Why is it that the small landlords with the units 0 to 35 have to jump through all these hoops, but yet you just seem to be dumping money out on people with developers and construction companies? This budget to me is like a trough where everyone can come and eat at the expense of the taxpayers. You need to revise some of those commitments, starting with my alley at 1813 Darrell. Complete the alley so I can have access to my garage and my neighbors can have access to theirs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes public comment, and we move now to items for discussion, beginning with D1, which I believe will begin with a presentation from our library.
Thank you, Mayor Biss, City Manager Stowe, and council members. My name is Heather Norberg, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Evanston Public Library. I've worked at the library for over 10 years, but this is my first presentation to the council. I'm joined tonight here by our Library Board President, Tracy Foltz, and the Secretary of the Library Board, Terry Soto. For the new council members, I'd like to say congratulations on your appointment and thank you for your service. I'd also like to offer you a few points of information about the library and our somewhat unique budget process. The library is a special case. We are not a department of the city like most others, but rather an independent unit of local government authorized and organized by the Illinois Local Library Act. This state statute provides for the appointment of an independent legislative body, the Library Board of Trustees, to govern the library. The board is appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. I'm here tonight to tell you about the priorities and work of the library and the budget that the library board has prepared to accomplish those priorities and that work in 2023. The Evanston Public Library provides access to an outstanding collection of books, music, and movies in both physical and digital formats. So far this year, more than 4,400 residents have registered for a new library card. And Evanstonians have checked out more than 730,000 items. We regularly check out more than 1 million items to Evanston residents every year. But the benefit of the library is not just access to its collection. The library serves as a connector for collaboration, learning, and literacy in many forms. We've hosted over 1,300 events so far this year, with more than 23,000 attendees. These happen at the main library downtown and at the Robert Crown Branch Library, but 25% of our events also take place at locations outside of the library's buildings. We believe that it's crucial to bring the library and its resources out into the community to where residents naturally gather. This summer alone, library staff have visited over 45 locations, including parks, beaches, block parties, camps, festivals, and other city events. We partner with over 100 nonprofits and community organizations every year. We're an information resource hub. Investment in the library has a multiplier effect that helps other organizations in town do more. Residents come to the library looking for information, but what they get is connections to the wide array of services and resources available from our partners. We connect individuals to legal, employment, health, and social service information We employ a full-time social worker in the library who assisted 141 individuals in the last quarter alone. We provide one-on-one help with technology needs. So far this year, we've had over 20,000 computer sessions at our branches. And we have Wi-Fi hotspots and laptops for folks to check out and take home. We support early childhood literacy and lifelong learning in many forms. We expand opportunities for teens in science, technology, engineering, and math. Our spaces and our events are places for community connection and creative collaboration. All of our programs and services are free to use. But it takes people. Our biggest resource are the library staff who serve the Evanston community every day. The library employs over 110 individuals in 50 full-time and 60 part-time positions. Their salaries account for almost 72% of our budgeted expenditures. So our biggest expense are people and jobs. For the 2023 budget, we've trimmed our non-personnel operating expenses where possible, while keeping the level of engagement, programming, and communications intact. Due to inflation, the costs for the remaining service contracts, materials, and equipment have increased. The $500,000 increase in personnel costs in 2023 reflected in this chart are estimated based on projections from the class and compensation study and the upcoming union negotiations. Looking at the library's revenue sources, the largest revenue source for a public library in Illinois is from local property taxes. The library tax levy accounts for about 3% of the Evanston property tax bill. To put our revenue streams in context with other area libraries, the Evanston Public Library receives about half the property tax funding per resident compared to our neighbors. These are all great libraries, but so is the Evanston Public Library. Public libraries are not really competitive spaces, but our staff really are the best. They work hard every day to serve the community with compassion, creativity, and a true commitment to public service, intellectual freedom, and equity of access to resources and information. They are superstars. It's because of their dedication and hard work that our library is really doing more with less. So while the local property tax levy accounts for nearly 88% of our revenue, the library does pursue other revenue streams, such as grants and donations. These philanthropic sources account for about 12% of our budgeted revenue. To put this into perspective compared to our neighboring libraries, we have the smallest budget and we get a higher percentage of revenue from non-tax sources compared to our peers. The library's budgeted net tax levy has been flat for the last 3 years at $7,252,000. The actual amounts shown here for 2020 and 2021 are higher than that figure because of the 3% loss factor that's added to make up the total gross levy. For the 2023 budget, the library board has included just over $7.5 million in tax revenue. That's a 3.9% increase, or about $280,000 more than the last 3 years. The 2023 budget also includes just over $1 million in non-tax revenue. Again, this will be from grants and donations. The library board carefully considered many options when preparing the 2023 budget. We looked at the impact if we kept the tax levy flat again for the 4th year in a row. We considered how much we would have to increase the tax levy to cover the total estimated increase in personnel costs next year. That would have been about 10%. We discussed the impacts of these options on the library fund going forward over the next few years. After all of these deliberations, the library board has developed a budget that includes this 3.9% levy increase to cover the inflationary costs of service contracts and supplies, while keeping our current levels of programming, resources, services, and outreach. We anticipate non-tax revenue sources in 2023 will again account for about 12% of our revenue. So even with a 3.9% increase in our tax levy, given our anticipated personnel expenses, we will end the year with a deficit. We will use the library operating fund balance to make up for that difference. As of December 31st, 2021, the library's operating fund balance was just over $3.5 million, which is about half of our property tax levy for 2022. That's just under 5 months of our operating expenses. Having a healthy fund balance is proving especially important this year because, as you know, Cook County is delayed in issuing the second half of our property tax levy. Again, this levy counts for 82% of our revenue sources. Because of the library board's careful stewardship of its resources and the growth to our fund balance, we have enough cash on hand to weather this delay, and we do not need to incur any additional debt to maintain library operations while waiting for the second half of our tax levy this year. The library board seeks to maintain 4 to 6 months of expenses in its fund balance. In 2023, the library's budget does include spending down this fund balance by approximately $500,000 to cover the anticipated personnel increases. We anticipate continuing to spend down some of this fund balance for the next few years because of these increases, while still keeping enough in our reserve for future contingencies. We're bringing this information to you tonight as part of the process governed by the Illinois Local Library Act. When it comes to the budget, the library board has independent legal authority to set its budget. Section 410 of the Local Library Act then instructs the library board to prepare and submit to the city a statement of financial requirements of the library for the ensuing fiscal year and the amount of money which, in the judgment of the Board of the Library Trustees, will be necessary to levy for library purposes. The City Council, as the municipal authority, then adopts this tax levy on the library's behalf. So again, we're bringing you this information tonight as part of the process governed by the Illinois Local Library Act. On Wednesday evening, the library board will have its truth and taxation hearing. Then on November 16th, the library board will adopt the library's tax levy. This will then be brought to you as the municipal authority to levy on behalf of your Evanston Public Library. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for your support of the work of the library and of the library board, and thank you for your attention to the role given to you under the Illinois Local Library Act. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Norberg, and welcome to City Council. It's sort of hard to believe this is your first time here, and we're glad to have you. For discussion, we begin with Councilmember Burns.
And sorry to start on this note because I appreciate the presentation, and this is not any indication of where I'm at on this issue, but just as a matter of law, Corporation Counsel Cummins, so we have the authority to adopt or to not adopt this budget or the levy.
Not quite. Good evening, members of City Council, City Manager Stowe, all of the rest of us in attendance, Corporation Counsel Nicholas Cummings. The City Council has to levy the tax on behalf of the library, but the library's Board of Trustees adopts the levy. The only time that there's any sort of authority that goes beyond the library Board of Trustees is if the levy is of a certain amount, it exceeds the value of the total value assessed of all property in the city of Evanston, then the voters would actually have to vote and adopt that increase in the levy. It would be.
So we're not approving anything. We're just, they're letting us know that they're increasing the levy, and that's that.
Correct.
Okay. That was not my understanding coming into this meeting. Thank you for the clarification.
Is there any further discussion?
I do have a
Councilmember Nusma.
Could you speak to your fund balance policy? Has it been policy for a long, long time to have a 4 to 6 months reserve in the fund balance?
Thanks for that question. No, it hasn't been policy for a long time, but it's been practice. So the board has been intentionally building the fund balance. If I go back to that slide, you can see over the past couple years, we've been adding to the fund balance to get it up to that 4 to 6 months. That is the board's intent, their desire to have it between 4 to 6 months. But only in the past 2 or 3 years has it been within that range.
And just as a point of information, that's significantly higher in percentage terms than the city's kind of past practice, which is targeted for 2 months.
Yeah, I think that given that we don't have a wide variety of revenue sources, the fact that property taxes are such a high 88% of our revenues, a situation such as we find ourselves in today is a reason that we like to have such a healthy fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Kelly, followed by Ravel.
I understand how school districts work, but just to understand the library better. So I've been discussing this with our Corporation Counsel coming. So that I understand, if it exceeds 0.15% of all.
So because of the size of our city, the Board of Trustees is allowed to propose a levy that this body will have to actually levy on the taxpayers, as long as that does not exceed 0.15% of the value of all taxable property in the city. So if this levy that they're proposing is less than 0.15% of all of the taxable property in the city as equalized and assessed by the Department of Revenue, then it's allowable. If the increase is above 0.15 but less than 0.60, then that question has to go to the voters.
Okay, so it just seems like not, and I'm sure this doesn't exceed it, but that would be a good number to have generally for us to know. Is that a really difficult number to?
The value of all taxable property in the city?
That's not a number that's out there by the
I certainly do not know that number.
Kagi's office. Okay. Oh. I mean, again, I just think it's to understand this as a concept.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This EAV, as of the last year, this year they haven't come out. Our EAV is 3.2 billion. Or even 3.4, but yeah, I can check the number. We have data available.
Thank you. And I had another question. So am I understanding that this increase is really to adjust for inflationary costs? That's purely what the increase is for?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And the personnel increases.
Okay. Do you have, I know last year I'd written to the library about it. You had a great document regarding the budget request that broke it all down. It sounds like there's not a lot to be broken down, but is there a document available?
There is a document that will be in the library board's packet for this Wednesday that has by the different business units how much it is. So the children's, early learning and literacy, lifelong learning and literacy, et cetera.
Okay. And so how much is the personnel's increasing by how much?
About $500,000.
And so how many employees?
110 employees.
Increasing by 100?
Oh, increasing by one additional position.
Okay. So the 500,000 is for the inflationary adjustment plus one position?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Just to make sure, just to clarify, Mr. Cummings, is that number 0.15%, that caps the levy or it caps the increase?
It caps the levy. the increase of the levy. The total levy cannot be more than 0.15% of the total assessed value, which Hitesh said was 3.2 billion. 3.24 billion, sorry.
So it caps the total levy at like just shy of 5 million. Do I have that right? Oh. Okay. Councilmember Ravel.
Just a quick question. I'm looking at your graph there. So what, in 2026, what do you predict your fund balance is going to be then? Roughly?
I believe it's roughly $2.5 million.
No, but I mean in terms of number of months reserve.
3 months?
Okay. Ish. Thank you.
So no one is asking to speak for first time, so we go back to Councilmember Newsma with 4.5 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It might not be part of this presentation, but I'd be curious to hear if you guys are thinking about our city's climate action plan when you're planning your capital budget and your operating budget.
Yes, we are. Our capital projects for next year include 2 projects. One is a replacement of the boilers at the main library, and those are original to that building, so they've reached their 30-year lifespan. So replacement of those is important. And then the second project is for the LED lighting project, and that has climate impact, replacing the lighting to all LED.
Great. Then let's make sure we keep the library in mind when we're talking about solar on city buildings.
Good idea.
Thanks.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, thank you so much for all you do and all the great work your team does, and we appreciate the presentation.
Thank you very much.
This brings us to item D2, discussion of the 2023 proposed capital improvement program. I think for this we'll begin hearing from Laura Biggs.
Thank you, members of the City Council, City Manager, and City Clerk. My name is Laura Biggs. I'm the City Engineer. I gave a presentation a few weeks ago, September 19th, to discuss issues related to the capital program. And at the time, there was some information requested, additional project information that could be used to help the City Council prioritize or give feedback on priorities for specific capital projects. At the time, our concern was that we, especially in parks and facilities, we have a number of projects that are responding to crises in different facilities and parks, and we are unable to address all of them as they are occurring. And so for that reason, we had asked for additional information or guidelines as to prioritizing. This initial slide here on the CIP funding levels is from that presentation, just to orient ourselves. You can see as you look down across the columns, the last 2 columns, the 2022 general obligation bond, which is the 3rd column over, and the 2023 general obligation bond, there is a big jump in parks and facilities projects, and that is largely because of the number of crises that the different facilities and parks are experiencing. And as you look at the bottom, it jumps the GEO bond from 10 million, which is our normal general obligation bond each year, to 24 million. The staff is not recommending actually that we spend 24 million. The city staff is not robust enough, or we don't have enough staff to be able to manage that kind of increase in the number of projects. Rather, we are requesting some guidance on how to prioritize which projects should be addressed in 2023. This slide is also from that presentation. It refers back to a memo that was delivered to the August meeting of the Parks and Recreation Board, which indicated the number of parks facilities that we have, the different infrastructure in the parks, and how it is generally reaching the end of its useful life. Due to underinvestment, it has not been replaced at a rate that allows us to continue to maintain the same number of playgrounds in working order, the same number of parks amenities in working order that we historically have had. So as you look at this is just one example. In that memo, which was attached to the September 19th packet as well, we showed it for other amenities, but for playgrounds, we have 12 playgrounds that are greater than 25 years old, even though the life of a playground is only 15 years. And when you look at the list of playgrounds that fall into that category, you see the list of playgrounds that we are starting to remove equipment from. Over and over again, this is where we're going to just take away the amenities that we have. So this is the challenge that staff is facing, how to prioritize amongst these different parks. Similarly, in facilities, we discussed at September 19th that we have 6 facilities out of the 60 buildings that the city owns that are having a number of issues, where there's at least one building system that is reaching the end of its useful life and will be a substantial improvement to replace. Of the 6 facilities, 2 of them we are still getting some additional information on. That's Noyes Cultural Arts Center and Police Fire Headquarters. The other 4 that are listed there, you can see that we generally are starting to get the information, although we don't have everything exactly yet. But it is enough to know that to maintain these 6 facilities, we will really be shorting doing the facilities work in our other 90% of our buildings that we own. So having said that, at that meeting, it was specifically requested that we provide a list of which projects are typically the annual projects, where we do similar projects year to year, and which projects have we already started, are in some phase of planning and design, and versus which projects haven't started yet. In addition, as staff went through and was looking at information that may be useful to the City Council in setting priorities, we identified 3 other characteristics. One is the need for the project. Is the project being driven specifically by an emergency of some sort, or is it just meeting another type of City Council goal? Which projects are receiving outside funding, that either a loan, or low interest loan, or grant that is not generated by the City of Evanston but comes from another entity, and projects that align with CARP goals. In the packet, there is a matrix, which I'm not going to put on the screen because it has a lot of information and it would be hard to show. However, that matrix is a more detailed list of some of the stuff that we're going to discuss on the slides, and it is intended to show only the project characteristics. It is not intended to be a staff recommendation of which projects proceed. It is provided for information only for council members to understand which projects have which characteristics. So the first of these, of our annual projects, we do approximately 20 projects a year that are similar year to year. These include things like the street resurfacing program that is annual, water main replacement, street light poles and fixtures, sidewalk improvements, alley improvements, and of those approximately 20 projects, the funding varies slightly year to year. However, we spend about $3.5 million of our general obligation bond annually on those projects, and we spend about $13.3 million of funding that comes from other sources. In the case of most of these, it includes things like motor fuel tax funds for street resurfacing, water fund funds for paying for water main projects, sewer fund. That's largely it. Another characteristic that information was requested on is what is the status of the project. Staff assign these ranks. Again, they are not recommendations by staff, but really merely meant to characterize the state of with the phase that the project's in. As of today, this moment, October 17th, we have approximately 17 contracts where the design is close to completion or complete that will be going to be advertised for bid in the next couple months in order that they may be constructed in 2023. Now, we do quite a lot of design work over the winter, so there will be, by March, a lot more projects that are ready to go into construction. However, as of this moment, this is where we're at. Here is a list of the projects, which I don't expect anybody to memorize. I'm not going to go through every single one. You can see that it does include quite a number of our major projects which have been in the capital improvement program for many years. And again, there will be, by the end of winter, many more projects ready for construction. And this presentation will be posted on the internet, so you also do not need to memorize this or write everything down. This next criteria is a staff-generated criteria. In our previous presentation, we had showed there's different reasons why different projects are started. One being that the highest, most concerning criteria is there is immediate life safety or health concern that needs to be dealt with in a relatively prompt fashion. Going to things, these would be things, a lot of these things have to do with things like fire code safety issues. There is long-term safety improvements. Many of our traffic calming, sidewalk improvement, our streetscape improvements, we're addressing long-term pedestrian issues, are things that would fall under this category. Maintaining existing operations is a category that a lot of our parks fall into. If we want to maintain the existing amenities, there is a certain level of service that a certain amount of funding that is needed. If we choose to reduce our level of service, then not as much funding is needed. And then there are other city council goals and initiatives, and I in no way mean to imply that these are any less important, but these do include things like equity and CARP, things that we try to build into other projects, but there are some projects that are done solely for those reasons. We currently have 4 projects on the CIP that would qualify with immediate life safety improvements. These projects include emergency repairs for sewer. We do not actually at this moment know where the emergency repairs are. They tend to result in street failures that are pretty intense, and as the sewer collapses, so does the street. And so we budget money every year, which we usually spend about 50 to 75% of it. The animal shelter, which has some pretty substantial issues with the HVAC and fire safety concerns. The Ecology Center, which is undergoing a structural failure in the flooring system, particularly in the mechanical and electrical rooms. And the water plant, which has in its schedule a fire sprinkler system upgrade. That was recommended by FM Global, our insurance company. This is another criteria we use. Historically, staff has prioritized putting projects on the CIP where we do receive outside grant funding so that we can leverage the city dollars to produce a much bigger project and a much larger benefit to the residents of Evanston. I did not list all of the projects that have received outside grants. However, here is a group of them that we can use in examples. Green Bay Road, which is receiving Surface Transportation Program funding, which is a federal grant administered by the North Shore Council of Mayors. We have been, again, a lot of these bigger projects we work on for many years, so this grant funding is not necessarily going to be expended entirely in 2023, but is just part of a long-range project. Oakton Corridor Traffic Calming, which has received a $500,000 grant and is scheduled for construction next year. Street resurfacing, we would do with motor fuel tax funds, which are granted to the city based on a formula related to our general population and how much the state collects in motor fuel tax. Alley improvements, which utilize a variety of items, which include Community Development Block Grant, which we apply for each year, waste transfer station funds, as Mr. Sutton correctly identified in his public comment, that we have been funding alleys based on settlement funds from the waste transfer station, and the animal shelter, which has received a couple of grants. Finally, staff knows that this is a really critical city council goal, which is alignment with Climate Action Resiliency Program. I can honestly say that the vast majority of our projects do move forward one or more CARP goals, regardless of whether they are specifically funded as a CARP project or not. There are many goals in the CARP plan, and I will not go through all of them, but there are 7 goals which tend to fit capital projects. So when we look at things like transportation and mobility, we are looking at the need to bolster pedestrians, bicycles, transit, electric vehicle use, and most of our large projects do move this goal forward. That is a big reason why we do some of the large streetscape projects. Buildings typically most of our building improvements fall under municipal operations, reducing our carbon footprint, building efficiency with net zero emissions. In some cases, health impacts of extreme heat, where we're really looking at the resilience of buildings and being able to improve the quality of them and their ability to manage intense environments that we're expecting. There are projects that meet goals that are not in this list, but I am just providing it as you can see as you read down them that quite a lot of our parks, our facilities, and our transportation projects would naturally fall into the CARP program. And with that, the information, again, is included in the project characteristics matrix. At this point, I think that we are just interested in hearing any feedback people have about how projects should be prioritized, what would be the biggest consideration, and if there's any recommendations on how we could adjust the capital improvement program in the future.
Thank you. And I think you, tell me if I'm wrong, my understanding is you're also looking for some feedback on just sort of what number to get to.
Yes.
Right.
I mean,
so what number to get to and what's the process by which we pare down to that number?
Yes.
Correct? Okay. Are there questions or feedback from council members? Councilmember Burns.
I guess for me, I would probably start off with project need, I think, which is, what do we need to do next year in order to make it through next year? And I think that is addressed under project need, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, there are different reasons why we start projects. Okay. And in addition to project need, I'm totally open to whatever the city council suggests. However, I would look at both what are the immediate safety concerns that we really need to address, but also when we look at grant funding, a lot of the grants are tied to a schedule to get into construction. And so I would want, unless we are willing to give back the grant funds, we need to consider that as we look at which projects move forward. Projects that receive grants that are tied to a schedule or a deadline.
So project need, again, specifically just trying to see what we need to do to get through the next year, because we've only recently created the Finance and Budget Committee. There's a working group that I'm a part of, CIP working group. There's a working group of the Finance and Budget Committee, and we've just assembled. And I think we need additional time to discuss this and to come up with recommendations, which is why I would probably start off with what we need to absolutely do to get us through next year. I also feel uneasy about spending, I think it's $3 million on windows of the Civic Center, really any facility that is part of an open discussion on whether or not we're going to continue in that space. I think we need to see those discussions through before we make those type of investments, unless, again, it falls within the category of things that we just have to do to get us through the next year. And that's all for now. That's the only comments I have for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Kelly, followed by Nusma.
Thank you. So yes, I would second what Councilmember Burns said. In terms of like immediate life safety, you listed, what was the fourth one? I didn't get a chance. Since we don't have this, I don't think.
Oh,
Could you-
I apologize. It is the water plant fire sprinkler system.
That was number 4?
Yes.
Okay, so of each of these, like the sewer, the animal shelter, and the ecology center, not everything that you're proposing that we spend money on is directly related to safety. So I'd ask also, like, what aspects of it, it's over $1 million for ecology center, what parts of that are related to the immediate safety, immediate life safety, the same with the animal shelter. And also I just want to, the concern about the $3 million for windows, how many, I'm sorry to ask this right here, but how many windows are there that we're talking about for 3 million windows?
419.
419 at $3 million? Okay, I can't do the math that fast.
So the windows are large, custom-sized windows. They're not small, standard size you pick up at a regular supply shop. And we did a cost estimate for looking at replacing them. So the issue with the windows is there is water that is leaking into the facade. And you can go and look at the windows, any window, and you can see that the sealant around the window has failed, and there's a gap between the window and the brick. And there's really 2 ways to address this. You can seal around the window again and put in new caulk, or you can replace the window and then seal around the window and put in the caulk. The windows were last replaced 28 years ago. At that time, they were sealed and they had caulk put around them. To my knowledge, no caulking has happened since then, and the life of caulk is maybe 10 to 15 years. So during this time, this gap of 8 to 10 years, there's been ample opportunity for water to get in. And then I think we see the issues that we have, which is that the brick starts to detach from the structural underlayment and needs to be addressed with a major repair, potentially being rebuilt completely. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, the windows are not operable in the Civic Center. At best, a few of them are. The Civic Center ventilation, as it was originally designed, was based on the natural ventilation. There's no forced air ventilation in the Civic Center, which the deal with natural air ventilation is if employees feel that they don't have good air quality for some reason, they need to be able to open the windows, which they generally can't. Repairing the windows so they could be opened is about as much as replacing the windows most likely, and it is talking with our professional staff, our architects. They are hard-pressed to recommend that we take a window at the end of its useful life and spend several $100,000 sealing it in the event that we will replace it in just a year or two, that's kind of a waste. And yet the building facade is failing. Now we're seeing signs of it. So I think the reason why it is put into the budget is that there is hope that we would start making some choices about the Civic Center, if we're going to stay or not. That would inform our capital improvement program for the future. There's also money put in for tuck pointing. The same reason is actually having a consultant look at it and tell us what is going on with the facade. They're recommending that 10 to 15% of the facade be tuck pointed again, because that is, again, where grout fails, then water can get into the facade. So that is also included. And in addition, there's money for consulting services, which would be spent on whatever the next step is. It takes, if it's a large project, whether it's a renovation or moving, it's going to take 5 years from the time we start to when we are able to be in whatever the space is completely done, if we move forward with enthusiasm. And for that reason, we've budgeted money for next year with the assumption that it will need to be there if a decision is made on how to move forward.
Thank you. So it does seem very high. It's over $7,000 a window for a massive amount of windows. I would just say I would like to see that looked at again. I would not advise spending that sort of money next year, in a year where we're going to be having some hard times financially, spending $3 million on window replacement. But I am glad we're looking at maintaining the Civic Center and investing in it. I think we all need to see what's been spent so far to date. We all see that there's a lot of work going on with scaffolding, the parapets have been repaired, I think. A lot of work's been done, but we aren't really clear on those expenditures. So I have asked that at not the next APW, but at the following one, that we get a better understanding of expenditures, that maintenance expenditures to date and over the years, and actual projected costs to improve the Civic Center. I think we're all looking to not, ideally, to avoid bonding out next year. The rates are going to be high. They are high now, and they're only going to get higher for a while. So I think we're looking at reducing that 24 million. It looks like we've got a 24 million proposed cost. So anything to bring that down. Can you tell me, with the contingency fund at 600,000, I think it's the same amount from year to year we've been using. Was that entirely spent, the 600,000 from last year?
As of now, in 2022, we essentially have spent the contingency funds, or have committed them to deal with specific issues.
So we've spent down 100% of the 600,000?
Yes, just in the last month or so, we committed to moving forward. There's like emergency repair on the elevators at Police Fire Headquarters. I apologize, I don't have everything at my fingertips, but I'm happy to.
That's okay. And then, so I was just asking, in terms of the life safety, again, that be identified. And even the grant you mentioned, there is a schedule. It would be nice to, of course, if we've already accepted grant money and contingent on certain construction, certain projects, it would be good to see that schedule and the timing requirements for those. Let's see. And I also had a question regarding it seems like there's two numbers being floated for the animal shelter. There's a 6.2 and a 5.1. If you could explain that. I also noticed that the only breakdown I'm seeing for that was from last year, and it lists, I think it's $1.2 million in unidentified costs, and then another two sets of contingency costs at about exceeding $800,000. So that comes to about $2 million in really unidentified costs for a $6 million project. So I think it would be really important to be able to see that broken down a little bit more.
I'm not entirely sure the 6.3 versus 5.1. I can get more information on that. But I will say 6.3 was intended to be a project cost, which includes soft costs like consulting services, FF&E, which are the furnishings and equipment that go into it. The actual construction cost estimate of the animal shelter is more like 5.1 million. I don't know the exact number right at the moment. In terms of, what was your question regarding contingency? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll pull it up in just a moment. I have it here, but there was $1.2 million was listed as unidentified expenses. Then there was two sets of contingency funds, one for design and one for construction, each at like 380,000 about. I just remember, or maybe 400. I'll find it in one moment. But it came to a total between the 1.2 and the two contingency funds to about $2 million. I think that will be something going forward that we really should see a breakdown for these expenses. We haven't had an actual response to an RFP to really understand these expenses, but that's the only cost identification that I found. And $2.2 million on a $6 million project just seems high.
So the not yet identified cost, which is shown in the different cost estimates I've seen, is actually around, it's a little over $500,000, and that's related to soil remediation, which is a tricky thing to estimate. And so they've been carrying kind of an allowance based on a cost estimate. The soils are particularly bad, and it appears that they may be contaminated as well with some hazardous materials, and so we are working to address that. Contingency, there is, in the cost estimates I've seen, a little over $100,000 for design contingency, which is often carried as a thing as you go into like a new building construction, things that the owner requests as the building is being completed. So they're kind of like an allowance idea. And then a construction contingency of $225,000, which is set aside for unknown construction costs or escalation, which we may not be familiar with at this point in time. And then, I'm sorry, the $500,000 in contingency is the soils cost. The not yet identified cost is temporary shelter costs, which we are still we are finalizing that now that we have guidance on how to move forward from last meeting. So that was set aside as like $500,000.
Okay, but it does, I'm looking here at the cost, and it says the total unidentified cost to be $1,252,000, and design contingency $417,000, and construction contingency at $417,000.
The soft cost being $1.2 million, it includes $635,000, which is like that FF&E and other things related to just furnishing out an animal shelter. It includes $100,000 for the initial study, which was sort of done outside of the $6.3 million budget, and the not yet identified, which is the temporary shelter costs.
And the $700,000 that's already been voted on and allocated for design, is that part of this number, the 600? The 6 million?
Yes, that's included in the 6.3
That 700,000, so that can be deducted from that. In
Yes,
terms of cost for
but
that.
in terms of the total project cost, it's included in the total project
But
cost.
our budget for next year, we can take,
It's not included in the budget for next year.
okay, thank you.
Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the capital projects typically take a number of years from concept through to completion as you go through initial studies and engineering and eventually you go to construction. So that would seem to make it kind of difficult to reevaluate every year and make drastic changes on the fly year to year.
That would be a challenge, and I would not generally recommend doing that.
So you mentioned, I think you said 17 projects are approaching the bid stage?
Yes.
And so of those 17 projects, are there any of those 17 that we don't need aren't rated as a level 4 need?
Well, there we go. So that is a very difficult question because there are a number of projects that, are new improvements that we haven't had up to now. So, for example, looking at the Main Street streetscape, which is going, we've been working on that project for 6 years. And, technically, you don't need to do it.
As the fourth ward council member, I'm going to say we do need that one.
But yes, it's recommended. So all of these are kind of in a range. Things like a skate park are not necessarily something that the city would really have to have, but it's something where there's been so much public engagement and so much money invested to date that I would not recommend delaying that because you will have essentially wasted both the money and the effort, and people are now emotionally committed to that type of project.
So we have a lot of time and energy and money into every project on this list.
Some of them are less. I can tell you that the Davis Street Lake Street viaduct lighting is a project that we haven't done a lot of public engagement on. We did receive money from a planned unit development, which is covering about half the cost. And we get a lot of complaints about the lighting under the viaduct, that people don't feel safe. They feel like cars don't see them at night when they're trying to cross the street around the viaduct. So that is the kind of thing that, it's a smaller project. I think totally it's only like $90,000, and half of that is coming from a planned unit development contribution. But again, the staff has hired a consultant, completed a design. We're working to get a permit to finish the completion of it, but yes. And similarly, Fire Station 1 and 3 locker room improvements. Locker rooms are in very bad condition. This has been something that the fire department's been requesting for a while, and it ended up on the CIP this year, and we started moving forward with it. So again, can you do without this? You can, but projects are generally on here because somebody wants them really badly.
Let the record show that fire chief is shaking his head. Yeah.
Just so I don't think in general, because we have had a lot of funding limitations, that we really do have a lot of frivolous projects. Most of the stuff that's on the CIP are things that were really wanted by a constituency or are necessary to deal with failures of our facilities and parks and streets.
So these might not all be ranked number 4, immediate life safety concern
No,
need.
most of them aren't.
Most of them aren't.
A lot of them are like long-term improvements that over time will improve the safety for pedestrians and people using mass transit or bicycles, or they're things that improve the health and safety and resiliency long-term, like the intake improvement, which is a large project. And actually that one we're pretty close to being into a construction
So
contract.
the 17 projects, fairly close to getting ready to go, represent a range of needs. Conversely, are there projects that we really need to do that are higher priority that are not on this list?
These are very challenging questions. I can't really speak off the cuff for that, but
I mean, just looking at the list, there's a bunch of projects listed as numbered, need 3 and 4 they're more than 17. So
yeah, so
safe to say the answer is yes, but how many?
Yes, I mean,
and what they are.
there's a group of projects like water main and sewer lining, street resurfacing that usually by the time the projects are in that process and they're actually on the list to be designed, which we've obtained survey and our staff has started, but they're not very far. You really don't want to slow it down. I mean, we should be, our streets have a life of maybe 20 years between resurfacing, and we have 140 centerline miles of streets, which means that every year we should resurface 7 miles of streets. But we resurface typically around 3 miles of streets. And so by the time we're getting to resurfacing something, the street is usually in very poor condition. It's frequently undergone multiple patching attempts, and the patches are failing. So that's usually by the time we get to street resurfacing.
So there may be there's a number of other projects not on this list of 17 that are ready for bid soon that will be ready for bid next year at this time.
Well, they'll be ready, many of them will
Or
be
maybe-
ready by the spring.
Yeah, or maybe even earlier, that are maybe higher need than some of the ones on this list.
Yes.
So how do we prioritize here? If we had to cut back, where does it make sense to cut?
Well, that is partly what I'm asking the
Right.
city council. But as I said with Councilmember Burns, I would really look at the projects that are tied to a schedule for grant funding, both because we could lose the funding if we don't do the projects. And the funding has gotten a lot more competitive to get in the last few years. So it's harder and harder to get the funding, but also because we get funding because these granting agencies, which we have relationships with going back decades, expect us to do the project. And if we start returning the grant funding or not doing the projects, then it jeopardizes our ability to get future grants.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. So if we're looking at this list of 17, can we start moving some into the yes, let's do them category or let's think twice category? I mean, that's what we're here to do. So of these 17, how many have grant funding associated with them that would indicate that we want to move forward?
And what are the timelines for those? Because that's important. We might have 3 years, so.
And maybe that's more than we can,
I can't really say without sitting
a
down
bigger
and
bite
doing
to
that
chew
analysis.
than we can chew right here, right now. Is that another meeting at the Finance and Budget Capital Improvement
I
Subcommittee?
could return at a future meeting to provide that information or
I mean,
issue this budget memo.
I would say it's a relatively concrete and important question that's probably worth, I would suggest, answering in writing to all of council.
Okay.
Because I think we'd all benefit from that information.
Okay.
And Chair, if I can stay in line with this issue right here, I just have a quick question.
We'll come to you in one moment.
Okay.
I'm done for now. Thanks.
Oh, the other thing, Deputy City Manager Stoneback reminded me, is that the things on this list, not all of them are GO bonds. So if the concern is only GO bond projects, that already is a piece of information which we can then not worry about other projects and focus on GO bond projects.
Instead of me relaying the concern there, like the intake project, that's, we're getting IEPA loan and WIFIA loan money for that. But the water main project is not, so we sell bonds for that, but that's abated by the water fund. So it doesn't have impact on the property tax, if you will. It goes on the water bill. So that's some of the other concerns that I just wanted to point out. Sewer projects are generally funded by either IEPA loans or by the sewer fund. So it's not the GO bond that impacts the property tax. So we can come up with a list of those projects separately from other projects that are GO bond funded, and then list the ones that have the grant funding when we would have to. The majority of the projects are when you have to be under construction. The one difference is the animal shelter. With the Cook County, it tells you have the project completed by a certain time. So that's the one that we're fighting there. So, but we can come back with this information. We'll take these 17 projects that are up here, talk about where they have grant, what the schedule is for that, and then also look at the rest of the entire list and try to come up with some prior non-GO bond type of work. And then we had the 4 life safety ones that I think that we were talking about that we needed funding for too. Again, 2 of those were out of the water or sewer fund as well.
The IEPA loan interest rates are really, really low, like 1 point something percent.
They're currently under 2%.
Currently. Can we anticipate that they will increase for future years, or they're still going to be low,
They're
relatively
supposed to
low,
be
but
half of the open bond market. So they'll always be low compared to sell GO bonds, but they can go up.
okay, thanks.
Councilmember Hedekades.
So I just wanted to thank you for putting together the spreadsheet. I think looking at like the cumulative scores would be a good start, so that we're not too emotional when we're looking at the names of the projects and we're focusing on the total score. Is this fully up to date with all the funding? And is there also, I'd be curious to see if there's anything on the project list that we have outstanding grant applications for?
Yes. So I don't have those listed specifically on this list, but there are projects that are on our long-term capital program, like the Church Street corridor improvements, which would put pedestrian and bicycle improvements from the west city limits to Dodge Avenue to allow high school students to better reach high school and to complete that bike gap. We don't have a grant for that. We have applied for a grant for that. It's a fairly expensive project. I think it is unlikely that staff would move that forward or even recommend moving it forward in the next couple of years unless a grant is received. So there are multiple projects like that where we have a better chance of getting the grant if we complete the phase 1 planning for the project for transportation projects, but we do not. We still plan to apply for a grant. We don't actually plan to move forward with those projects without grants. And then similarly, the Shoreline Stabilization, which we entered into a study for several years ago, we had some emergency repairs made on the shoreline that during that time we hired Smith Group to be able to give us a roadmap. They evaluated our entire shoreline, indicated where the worst situations were. We put temporary repairs in, but that wasn't a final improvement. Now they're doing a study for a final improvement. And those types of repairs where the shoreline is deteriorating are really good projects to apply for FEMA through their BRIC program, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. However, there is a process where they want you basically to complete preliminary design and complete their benefit cost analysis before you apply. So we've been applying, and the last time we applied a year ago, they reached back out to us and said, this is a great project, but don't come back until you've completed the BCA. So we have projects like that where we're moving forward with the idea that we would apply for grants, and I can indicate those as well.
Thanks.
So at this time, Councilmember Ravel.
So I too would like to say thank you for putting together this chart and the rating system. It's a really helpful way to think about all these projects. I have just for information question. For the city solar infrastructure, do we have an idea of where we're going to try to do that?
So I can defer to Kara Pratt, who is in the other room.
There she
Oh,
is.
who's right here.
Oh, okay.
And she can indicate where we are with that.
Good evening, Kara Pratt, Sustainability and Resilience Coordinator. In terms of the solar infrastructure for city facilities, there's a lot of engineering work that would need to be conducted before we would identify exactly which sites to go with. So as you're all aware, we've talked about installing solar at the Robert Crown facility, which would most likely at this point be a power purchase agreement, which would have a limited expenditure in terms of engineering.
Mm-hmm.
But for other projects, if the city chooses to pursue ownership of any solar, there is some expenditures that we would want to consider for the CIP. And so I worked with Laura and her team to identify an approximate amount of money that could be contemplated for something like that. And we would think about solar at the animal shelter, at any new facility that has, or any city facility that has a new roof in 2023 and onwards. So that's an idea of that funding.
Or an old roof like the water treatment plant.
Certainly. Also, new or replacing solar installations that are older at the city as well.
Right, okay, yeah. So I noticed in the parks section, there are quite a few parks that are slated for renovation. It seems, seems like a big number. Is this a typical number of parks that we plan to renovate?
No, it is not. So unfortunately, we're at this situation. I'm going the wrong direction. No, I was going the right direction. Okay, so we have these parks where the playgrounds are pretty old and they're failing. And so our Greenway staff has been going out and removing sections of infrastructure or is planning to do it in the next year or two. They can anticipate that it's just too far out of compliance and might be okay for a little bit, but it's not going to make it much longer. And so we have been working to look at those. A lot of times individual council members have said, hey, you keep removing playground equipment at this park in my ward. I would like that park fixed, which is a legitimate request. And so we've ended up with quite a number of parks. And many of these we are, probably half of them we've entered into design contracts with, but we have not yet started the public engagement in most cases. So that public engagement process is going to take a while. There's actually so many parks that we have under contract for consulting services at this point that I'm a little concerned about just the ability of the staff to get through all the public engagement by construction season. So some of these might just unfortunately, even if we've entered into a contract, they may be naturally delayed because the staff just doesn't have the ability to host that many meetings simultaneously.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was wondering about, because your memo talked about difficulty to implement. Even if we wanted to spend all the money in the world, we don't have enough staff to really carry out some of these.
So we have on staff one landscape architect, which we, even in the last 6 or 7 years, we've had enough parks improvements that she is no longer able to design all of the parks or even oversee the consultants for all the parks. And so one thing we've been able to do, we were reorganized 7 years ago so that all of the engineers and architects were put into the Bureau of Capital Planning. Prior to that, they were split amongst different departments. And so some amenities like tennis courts being resurfaced, we actually have members of our transportation staff do because it's a big asphalt improvement, or things like path improvements in parks. So we do leverage some of our other staff to help, but yes, we are getting to the point where that one landscape architect cannot really manage all those projects simultaneously. But, sorry, but I mean, this is kind of where, if we could get prioritization, if not tonight, then in our next discussion about which parks to consider first, that would be really helpful. And then there's a lot of projects that are not involving playground improvements on the parks list as well. And I'm not really sure how they slot in, but there are things that would improve our operations, although there's a cost associated with them, such as athletic field lighting.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so no one who has not yet spoken is requesting to speak. So we go back to those who are requesting to speak for a second time, beginning with Councilmember Kelly, who has 20 seconds left. Yeah. Nope.
Well, then I'm going to prioritize. I would like to ask that we not plan to repair Fountain Square. We are litigating, and I do agree. I've spoken with a lot of residents, and we don't really know yet what that's going to look like, whether we would repeat the same plan as before. So I would ask that that be removed from the budget from next year. And I do have questions. The 1.3, is that accurate? 1.3 million for Civic Center renovation consulting services, or was that corrected?
So it is correct, as was intended. At the time that we were doing the budget, staff had done kind of preliminary cost estimates amongst the different failing building systems that are happening, came up with a cost for improvements around $45 million to address individually the 5 failing building systems, which is probably not actually a good way to do it. If you have that many building systems that are failing, you should probably just renovate the system. That works better as with bringing the building into compliance with modern building codes and ADA anyway. So anyway, that cost was about $45 million. And so to start the planning, we used an industry standard of 3% for consulting services in planning to get to $1.3 million.
I hope they'll look at geothermal and some other possibilities for the Civic Center. I think my 20 seconds is probably,
Yeah,
okay.
they are. Next is Councilmember Burns with 3.5 minutes left.
Just to make sure I'm understanding the matrix correctly, the zeros represent projects that are 100% city funded?
In that category, yes.
Okay.
There's in the non-city funding category, a 4 indicates that more than 50% of the projects are funded, which is typical of our transportation projects. 2 indicates that less than 50% of the project is funded by outside grants, and a 0 indicates that we don't anticipate getting an outside grant for this project.
So I see under alley paving, under annual projects, it says alley paving hyphen CDBG, and then there's under the non-city funding, there's a 4. So does that mean we don't count CDBG as city funding?
CDBG is not city funding. It is a
Because it's passed through,
federal grant that is a block grant that the city chooses how to allocate, but it's all federal funding.
And you know, I know staff has asked for direction about kind of the future of this building, but I was also under the understanding that there was direction asked about our parks as well, and whether or not we want to continue to maintain as many parks as we currently do. Is that correct?
Unless the city council is willing to spend $7 million a year on parks, the vast majority of which will be general obligation bonds, unless a new funding source is identified, we will not be able to maintain the operations just because playgrounds and other amenities are failing faster than we can fix them. So it isn't necessarily staff making a recommendation on how this is just like a scientific fact about where we're at.
But you're asking for direction on that, was my
Yes.
understanding. Okay. And the only reason why I say that is you know, personally, I feel like if staff is asking for direction, that's what I was saying earlier about if something is a part of an open discussion, again, I don't think we should be making long-term investment decisions this budget season, especially because we have a finance and budget committee that is working diligently to answer some of these longer-term questions about open discussions. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that that is an open, what I feel is an open discussion, and staff has asked us for direction. And then, Councilmember Kelly, is that it wasn't a motion, but would you like to make that a motion about the Fountain Square, or we'll
Correct, we're not-
discuss
there's
it
no
at a
action.
later
I
date?
don't think any motions are in order tonight.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure the public understood that, because they may not understand that. They may think it is removed because one council member said it is removed, but you may see it again. And we'll
Yeah, I don't
discuss
think I
it. Okay.
can legally take action, so this is just
It's
direction,
more for,
but I.
that was more so for the public to understand. Thank you.
Councilmember Nusma.
I'll weigh in on the Fountain Square question, just for the record as well. And given our budgetary constraints for next year, paying for that fountain to be removed out of our own money, I don't think is the right way to go. In fact, I would like to take a minute and think about a better way to do that. And the underground fountain hasn't been around long enough for it to become an iconic fixture. Maybe there's something we could do for less money that would get us where we need to go sooner rather than later. I think we still need to continue litigating because we should have gotten what we paid for. But maybe a smaller above-ground fountain would be something. It'd be an amenity for Fountain Square, the fixture for downtown, and maybe a lot cheaper.
Councilmember Burns with a minute and a half left.
Is there any way to align a fountain with carp? Giving out drinks of water or something? I don't know. Yeah.
So-
Cooling, that's what I thought too. I thought cooling. Yeah, I think cooling
Improving
deserves
access
a
to
one,
cooling
right?
assets like parks and beaches is actually a CARP goal, and that fountain acted as a splash pad. It was actually licensed by the Illinois Department of Public Health as a pool. So technically, it aligns with CARP
I don't
when
think
it's
we gave
operating.
it its due points though, did we? I saw 0 under that. Unless
Oh,
can we
that's
give it a
probably-
1 at least, a 1 or 2?
That would be an error, so that
Okay.
would be a 4.
No, it is. It definitely. And I actually, now I have something to defend this opinion, but I like the, what is it called now? The street level, what's the style that we have now, or that we did
Oh,
have?
the shared streets design, or?
This the design. I
Oh, the
like the
zero
fact
depth.
that young people can
Yes.
play in it, and then that's aligned with carp because they can cool down that way. But I actually prefer that as opposed to what we had before. So now I have something to justify that.
So every time, when it was operating, every time I would go downtown and see people
People use
interacting
it,
with
yeah.
it, I would take pictures. And
Exactly.
I will tell you that usually over half the people were adults.
There it is. All right. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on item D2?
Maybe a temporary above-ground fountain while we duke it out on the, yeah.
A sprinkler.
We can have a separate special council meeting for water feature brainstorming.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Biggs. Thanks to the team. And I think I don't do telepathy, but I'm guessing that you feel like you've gotten a lot of important feedback and also not enough.
Both.
And
So we will do some additional analysis and provide that information to city council and then return for another discussion.
yeah, so we'll have to continue these conversations.
Yes.
But we are committed to making that happen and making the right calls here.
Narrowing in.
And we'll get this document, correct?
This?
Yeah.
Yes, will be posted.
Could we get the spreadsheet in Excel form so we can do some
Yes.
sorting and stuff on our own?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This brings us to item D3, which I believe will begin with a presentation from Mr. Desai. Is that correct?
Okay, good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. So last week we put out the proposed budget for 2023, and obviously we have already talked to the council in some fashion about that. We had a good discussion at the Finance and Budget Committee very next day after we put out the budget. And here is the kind of presentation we will go through and then obviously take the questions. Okay, so this is just the summary. There are a few slides. So what is covered here? General fund projections, 23 budget, the rate increases, the new positions, the ARPA, and the capital improvement program is just a summary. Obviously, Lara has covered in full details. Total proposed budget for 23 is $402 million, an increase of around $42 million, and mainly because of the CIP project. And one of the big projects is in the waterfront, 23 million capital project. Lara touched on that, around 17 million, and then the rest of them is general fund. These are the numbers. I think we had a discussion at the finance budget to have the kind of numbers as of September and even provide the projections for the year end. And you would see that as of 9/30, the general fund number is around at $17.2 million. Projected is around 14.1. We have adjusted for some year-end expenses, and obviously some of the revenues would kind of slow down or fall off in terms of permit revenues or transfer tax or recreation revenues and like that. This was even the question and the discussion at the Finance and Budget Committee, salaries by department. And you would see that as of September, as the second column, we are at 70%. Target is 75%. And we are projecting the last column at around 95%. Some of them are a little over, health, fire, but I think some of them are even grant funded. In health, when there's expense for COVID grant, we have the revenues too to offset that expense. General fund projections for the major revenues. So where we are, we wanted to show some of the top revenues where we are doing pretty good. And obviously all those related to our economy, so income tax, sales tax, transport tax, liquor tax, wheel tax, ambulance service, and use tax. So the target is, again, these are the numbers as of September. We should be at 75%, but you would see that the only big anomaly you see in personal property replacement tax, this is just for this year based on the IDER's communication. We might still have a better number next year, but not as much as what you see right now in 22. So this is kind of a one-time this big high number. Some of those budgets were, for 23, we have substantially increased compared to 22. State income tax budget has gone up. GEMT in the fire for the ambulance service that are grants the money we get. Personal property replacement tax, even based on the number, we have bumped it down up to the almost 1.9 million, but it's still short, roughly $1 million of the actual this year number. Sales tax up by 200,000. It's a cautious. It could be up, but again, we hear the mixed things from the outside world that, okay, if there's a recession and the inflation is so we are kind of keeping that number kind of a little bit cautiously. Hotel tax is up. Recreation program fees, we are proposing 200,000, and the gas utility tax. The one in the red is a kind of a reduction in the revenue, and which is a transfer from MFT fund. So that's going away. Expense side, general fund, general wage increase. Looking into the market, we kind of estimated at we have seen numbers from anywhere from 3.5% to 5%. And I was just reading today, a couple of communities are increasing, including Naperville, are 4% increase in their budget this year for 23. So 3.2 million there. The new positions, 22.5 positions in the general fund. Obviously, we have more details later on. Some of the one-time expense you see there, cardiac monitors in fire, tree inoculation, sustainability incentives. And then some of those increases may be because of the inflation. The cost of fuel is the big one. Ultimately, the fleet fund gets the money from general fund, so there is an impact there to have an increased transfer. And the final thing is lifeguard. They're transferred from Parks and Recreation to the fire department. The proposed general fund balancing. So you would see this thing, we are showing the money coming in and money going out. And this was sent out, this was a part of our proposed budget, use of 2021 excess results. We plan to use that, 4.5 million, corporate property tax levy increase, 2.6. And then you would see some of those expense side, salary increase, new positions, one-time expense. And that's how we had balanced the budget, which this was a part of the proposed budget document. This is again the excess fund balance as of December 31st, 2021. So you would see that we ended up with around $31 million fund balance. 16.66% would be $19 million, leaving our almost $11.7 million in excess. And then some of the items which you would see down there approved by the council in the last few months to use that surplus. Fire truck purchase, transfer to CIP for maintenance, and those kind of items. So we are still left with around $6.8 million in excess surplus out of 21, plus whatever the surplus we generate during the 22. Fund balance policy, we just put it out there. You heard from Evanston Library about 4 to 6 months. We put out some of the other cities, and Naperville, Skokie displaying some of our neighbors here too. Niles 40%, Schaumburg 40%, and Evanston 16.66, which is a 2 months of operating expense. This is the property tax levy summary. You would see the general fund tax levy increase of 2.6 million to cover all these wage increases and the new positions. We are keeping the human service fund, general assistant fund tax levy, the flat. Library fund, you already see that a 283,000 increase there. Debt service levy is going down. And fire police pension, the net impact is kind of, it's a net wash. So overall you would see $2.2 million change or the increase in our levy, which is around 4% of the last year's net levy for the city and library as a whole. This is the dollar bill, and then we always talk about it because generally when people see the tax bill, they first call the city and say, okay, why are you charging too much? And that's why we try to say the city's portion is 17% out of this thing. It is mainly the school districts taking 2/3 of the taxes, and then the 13% is the rest of the taxing districts and Cook County. The property tax levy. This is again one of those things I heard every year that Evanston has a higher tax rate. So I kind of researched in the Cook County website some of our neighboring communities. So you would see Morton Grove is the highest, followed by Skokie, by Des Plaines, Lincolnwood, Niles, Evanston, and then the Wilmette. So these are some of our neighboring communities. Proposed budget impact of tax levy increase, the increase which we have proposed, and what would be the impact? And if you see somewhere in the middle of like say, okay, $3,000 market value of the home, they would see the $64 increase in the tax bill for the city portion. So we just kind of prepare this table. This is very handy at the ward meeting level because a lot of residents ask this. Proposed budget, the police and fire pensions. We talk a lot at the finance budget committee and even throughout the years, and Evanston has been kind of discussing this for many years, police and fire pensions. So on the left side, you see that, okay, for this year, how much more we are giving in excess of the state minimum, and it's 1.7 million. And these are some of the last 10 years contributions that, okay, how much more the city has contributed compared to the state minimum. And it's roughly almost $36 million. Proposed budget, the police fire pension. One of the things, this is kind of sometimes it's complicated and technical, but which rate, the rate of return, investment rate of return, how the other communities are using. The lower the number, the more the burden on the residents, or the city has to levy the amount more. So you would see that Evanston is at the 6.5%, which is at par with the state government, which is IDOI, Department of Insurance. Bartlett, 7.25%, Schaumburg, El Grove Village, Elgin, Algonquin, Warrenville, Woodridge. So I put in some of the numbers kind of scattered throughout our Chicago suburbs. Now, these are some of the proposed budget, the water and sanitation rate increase. So proposing 5% increase to the water rate, and what is its impact? It's like a $13.50 more per year, or $2.20 per bi-monthly bill. And the 1.8% increase, we could keep it to a minimum because of the $1 million transfer approved by the City Council from General Fund excess to the Solid Waste Fund. These are the positions broken down by the fund. General Fund, as we mentioned earlier, 22.5, followed by Water Fund, Fleet Services, Human Service, and other funds, totaling around 39. Proposed General Fund, new position. This is the list. Previously, you saw the overall numbers. This is the list by each department. And we have I think all the department directors and all that. If the council has a question, obviously we have posted all the memos on the city website, justifying the need for the position. These are in the other funds: Fleet, Sustainability, Water Fund, Human Service, Library. ARPA, this is the summary. Sarah Flex can touch on if you have a question more. But it's still some money uncommitted. And so capital improvement plan, obviously $103 million plan. Lara would have more details next week, but this is just, you would see the 415, which is our main capital improvement fund, 34 million, and water fund 57 because of the water intake project. This is the CIP tax impact. And this was just out that, okay, if we issue a $25 million bond, and based on the current rate environment, and again, I would go with the $300,000 home, the impact would be around $55. Proposed budget calendar. Obviously, budget discussion at the City Council happening right now. Next week is a budget hearing. We have a budget discussions, ward meetings. We have ward meetings scheduled. 2 town hall meetings on October 26th on Spanish, and November 3rd, the budget town hall. And truth and taxation public hearing on November 7th, and the anticipated budget adoption before the Thanksgiving, which is on November 21st. Now, after, what we heard, like we had a good discussion at the Finance Budget Committee. We got some latest number from September too, and with the trend and all that, we kind of came out with like a revised number. Some of the revenues were revised upward. We took I think we heard from some of the people to kind of, keep the levy flat, overall levy. So we kind of came out with this kind of scenario right now. And the other thing which was discussed at the Finance and Budget was the vacancy adjustment or hiring lag. Now, generally we go with 2%, but we have bumped it up in the revised our calculation to 4%. And then it goes down to 3% in 24, and then 2% to 22. And obviously, this is kind of more, we will make it dynamic. So as we get, real-time data, more actual data, we'll update and we'll see where we are. But that's what we have done, and which has improved the kind of overall outlook a lot. I mean, you would see the vacancy adjustment at 4% is a $3 million. And some of the increased, sales tax, home rule tax, as I said, we were conservative, I mean, I still have a mixed things, but at least I'm like, okay, I can go with some increase to those revenues. So overall, with those kind of adjustments, keeping the levy flat, so we took away that $2.2 million increase in the tax levy, 4% increase. And I think this would be a lot better. So you would see some of those things right there. Assuming $14 million surplus in 22. I think when 2 months back I presented here, I think I gave the scenario, the best scenario of $10 million, that we would end up $10 million. We are putting it to 14 million since we have extra 2 months of revenue, including that extra $1.25 million in other taxes, 4% vacancy, followed by 3% and 2%. Expense estimated to increase by 4%. And again, as I said, if we go into the inflation eases to more like that, we will adjust down, to the 3% or 2%. But right now, we are going with the 4%, at least for 23, I think that would hold true. Revenues, we are estimating to increase by 2% right now. Again, it's conservative. We will see that and see if we can bump it up to a 3%. And next is the important, overall net property tax levy held flat. And one of the questions, which again does not include permit and other revenue from Northwestern University football stadium at around $10 million, but we don't have much information in terms of timing, in terms of amount. And then obviously operating revenue once completed. There will be some loss of revenues too while the construction goes on. We generate a lot of money during the football season. So we would lose that money. And if you look at here in the out years, the fund balance, which is like the first blue line item, ending fund balance, in 23, we are proposing to have it at $41 million. Now, again, we are keeping this thing for the councilors to make a goal. I mean, this is the kind of a time to, as a part of the city council's adopted goal of stable city finances, that we are proposing to move the fund balance policy from 16.66 to 18%, 19%, and 20%. So over the 3-year period, kind of add around 3 2/3, to the fund balance policy. So we are in the positive in 24. In 25, the fund balance is almost $24.5 million, but it would be a little short of our 20% goal. You would see that the last bottom blue line, it's a $2.1 million in 2025. And then if you go to the last one, 26, the estimated fund balance is $11.8 million, and the goal would be around $27 million, and so we would be short by 15. So the negative numbers, you see that it's not a negative fund balance. It's negative compared to our adopted goal. But otherwise, the first blue line, all the positive numbers you see, is the estimated fund balance for general fund in the next 4 years. Okay, that's it,
Thank you very much, Mr. Desai. This year marks the first time that we've had a budget presented with the Finance and Budget Committee that's been up and running for the course of the whole year. And so we have with us the chair of the Finance and Budget Committee as well, who wanted to just give some brief comments about the work that they've done and some thoughts coming out of that work. Mr. Livingston?
Thank you, Mayor Biss. And Atash, thank you for the presentation. So there's a lot that we could talk about, and I don't want to get into too much detail. But first of all, I think the way that I would look at that budget is that line that shows usage of the reserves is a deficit. It's a deficit, right? And I would just look at the annual amounts, when we have spending in excess of our revenues. If we have excess reserves, that's good. But certainly I would not say that our goal, and we're going to have to, and I'm sure Hitesh knows this as well, we have to work with these numbers because that those uses of the fund balance to take it from, there's a lot of fortunate reasons why we got to a number that is, in the $40 million sort of range now. We don't want to see that bleed out over the next few years. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do. But first of all, we have, I think for the first year on the Finance and Budget Committee, it's been good to get grounded in some of the major points that we need to deal with, and working with the Jess and Clayton, who I think was here, and Clayton, good addition. So glad to have him, as well as Councilmember Burns and Kelly and Newsma and Reed and Wynn. I think we've all had some very good discussions, and also the fellow community members of Leslie McMillan, who's here, and Sherry Ruckus. So I think we are making progress on focusing on the major issues that I think we do, but we have a ways to go, and we need to stay focused on what the right points are. So when we first went over this budget a week or so ago, we as a group came up with a list of priority items that we think we want to focus on now. But again, it's going to be a process of years, I think, to really get to the degree of progress we need to make. The first one we've all talked about pretty significantly so far tonight, which is capital project prioritization. And there are several major projects that we believe we would like to review in a bit more detail. Some of them were reviewed tonight. I think we could come up with a better process for having a subcommittee of Finance and Budget, or Finance and Budget, come up with a template and a process to look at projects, how much individual projects are funded by outside money, how do we sort of institutionalize and come up with a better capital project approval, which every company has, which, sort of the organization that I'm, the world that I sort of come from. We should have a standard capital project approval that looks at all of the relevant cost savings and priorities and needs to do individual projects, and where's the money coming from, and really institutionalize a process to say, hey, this clearly meets our goals, and this one does not meet our goals. And that's what, certainly that's what a company does. I know that we're different than a company, but ultimately it's still a cost-benefit analysis based on what those priorities are. So we need to come up with that sort of process and institutionalize it. I would say some of the major projects that sort of jump out the most are the ones, I think all of them have been discussed tonight. Fountain Square, the animal shelter, the Civic Center. Tough decision there on the Civic Center. Because every dollar we spent is somewhat a sunk cost that would commit us to stay here more, right? Because we've already spent $5 million, how do we leave, right? So I still think we need to think about what is our long-term plan. The Ecology Center, one thing we did not talk about was the service center fuel replacement, but I think some of that might be outside funded. But that's another one that I think we would want to look into. But more, we need an overall process on how do we prioritize and say these are the capital projects that are most important to us. So that's one. More work to do there. How do we get to prioritization? And it seems like there's a consensus that we need a way to be more prioritized on capital projects. The second area that we want to focus on is police and fire pension funding. And I think Hitesh and I have corresponded on this quite a lot. I believe that we need to get a new actuarially determined glide path to both 90% funding by 2040 and 100% funding by 2040. And one thing that I do not believe is in the numbers that were just shown on pension funding is, as everyone in here would know, the stock market is down 25% this year. I don't know where exactly our assets are. We need to get a current update on that, but any view on what we need to contribute to get to our long-term goals of 90 or 100% funding, I believe, needs to take into account where we are today relative to our asset levels, because it is substantially different than some of the numbers that would have been used in the actuary reports that were presented, were calculated at the beginning of this year, because that's normally how we get to our recommended next year number, is use what comes out of the the prior year's actuary report, as I understand it. And I would say the beginning point of what the assets are and what the funding balance is materially misstated if we start with a number that is given what's happened in the markets today. But and there's been a lot of good work, since the 2008 Blue Ribbon Committee. There has been consistent additional funding, growth in the overall funding level, but obviously then you bump into a year like this, and we, I've made my own estimates. I think we need the actuary to come up with what their estimates are on exactly where the revised funding level is. But I would encourage us, let's update the numbers, let's use current numbers, let's try to get a glide path to 90 and 100%, and I believe it's going to be in excess of the numbers. I know it will be in excess, but I'm not an actuary. I just have done my own estimates, and I think it's higher than what is in there. But then also, I think that this council needs to make an absolute commitment. We have got to put this behind us, right? And it's gotten maybe a bit better, okay? I mean, I look at the numbers. That's why the Blue Ribbon Committee was founded, as I understand it, because in 2000 we were 60% funded, okay? In 2008 we were 42% funded. A lot of things going on there, right? Actuarial changes, market returns, but don't know what the funding policies overall were during that period of time. But one thing I want us to all get away from is that the state minimum contribution is anything we should even consider as reality of what a community should put into their pension plan. That is the minimum. It's not the recommended, and we ultimately want to get out of this. And if our goal is 2040, that's 18 years. We have some benefit of time relative that if we make relatively modest changes now, and they might have to be funded through property taxes. I don't know, through cost savings or property taxes, but I think it's once again, like when the Blue Ribbon Committee did their report, we need to make a similar commitment that this council is going to fund what it takes so that we can get to our funding goal by 2040. And unfortunately, this year we would have taken a step back, not because we didn't fund enough to get to the 90% goal, but because of a significant market value decline in the stock market. And maybe we'll have years that we exceed in the future, and we can readjust. But I would strongly recommend that annually we redo our glide path. We see where we are. We look at a 90 or 100% funding goal. And I would argue it's a 100% funding goal. I don't know why we would want to leave the Evanston of 2040 with over $100 million of remaining pension debt and pension deficit. And that's, again, roughly the number that I would estimate is the deficit between 90 and 100% funding in 2040. So I think that's something that the council needs to think about. But given the amount of time, I think you would find, and again, let's get actuarially determined numbers, that the difference between getting to 90% and 100% is not as wide as the ocean. It's a few $1 million a year. And if we are very consistently applying, we're going to remeasure, we're going to see where we are, we're still going to keep inside of our goal, we can find that in 18 years, things are a whole lot better. Pension funding doesn't go away. At 100%, you're still spending a lot, but at least we can get to the point where we're not making up for the hole that was built, that was dug historically. And again, there's been a lot of progress over the last 12 years or so, but we're still not there. I mean, I think we're somewhere in the 50s, probably the lower 50s, but again, we need the actuary to tell us and not my rough estimate. So again, I would advocate, and that's something for Finance and Budget to talk about more, what is the right amount of pension funding so that eventually we get to a day that pension is not one of the major items that we are wrestling with. And be that through other budget savings or be it through the fact that we need to dedicate property tax money or other money to make sure that absolutely happens. So the third area was on the open positions. Those have been discussed to some degree tonight. We're asking for a reconciliation between the 39 positions that were currently asked for in the recent Baker-Tilly study. Baker-Tilly did not include public safety jobs, but we just want to make sure we understand where the 39 are coming from, and then also get those prioritized and think about how, what are the most critical roles to fill. They're not all going to be filled at once. How do we prioritize the roles that need to get filled? And the same for the 40 open positions. So what's the priority? What's the timing? And then finally, we just talked about it. Given that, I think the open budget adjustment, and Mr. Desai has already reflected that, the 2% was too low. I mean, really, if we're going to add all these jobs, we're starting the year at 10%. So there could even be room above 4, But I think it's a good move in the right direction to really get to a realistic number that not all those jobs are going to be added at the beginning of the year, of course, and what is the right adjustment. And so then also, this is something maybe I would just like to understand better, but if you look at our balance sheet, at our statement of net position, we actually have, as I see, just looking at the statements, at the end of the year, and some of this is ARPA money, we had $81 million in cash and debt of, I think, about $159 million. So that's an odd relationship. I understand that on many capital projects, we need to fund all the money up front, make sure we have the money set aside. But I think, especially in this rate environment, let's make sure that cash position is as efficient as it could be. Is there a way to draw down some degree of free cash to avoid, as long as possible, issuing incremental debt in this interest rate environment? And also looking at, we've talked about it, some credit facilities, short-term credit facilities where we don't want to sign up for high interest debts, although in a year it looks like it wasn't that high, but who knows? High interest debt that we're locking into for 20 years. So anyway, those are some things that we're thinking about. I think the discussion about the fund balance policy is good, but as I started off there, I view those negative numbers in usage of the excess fund balance as being deficits. And how does that not happen? So I think we have a lot of work to do. And some of that will come out over a period of years. But how do we make sure those deficits don't happen to that degree? But also I go back to an area where I think, unfortunately, we do need to spend somewhat more to eventually get to the day where we are out of this problem with police and fire pension funding. That's our obligation. We don't define the benefits. We owe the benefits. We don't define them, but it's our job to fund them. And there's been progress, but not enough. Let's just be realistic. Let's use current asset values. And let's make sure that we're on a glide path to our 90, or I would argue, and I think some others would too, 100% funding balance by 2040, which we can do. It's not tens of millions of dollars a year. So that's all I can say.
Thank you very much. So now we start with Councilmember Burns.
I just wanted to Hitesh double check this, that the negative numbers we see based on the adopted kind of general fund balance goal does not include the Northwestern Stadium permits or whatever money we'll get from the park. I just want that said again, because I think absent them being forced out of the Big Ten,
it does not include
that stadium in place. I'm sorry?
It does not include.
Okay, thank you.
Because we don't know the deadline, the amount, and
absolutely. Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you. So, thank you, Mr. Livingston. That was great. I do agree. I think we need to be fully funding at 100%. Our pension obligation, and I think we can do it. I'm really, I'm delighted to see that staff has managed to, keep the levy flat, but I think in reviewing certain projects and others, we can reduce it enough to potentially continue to keep it flat and fully fund on the 100% path. I think that's somewhere, I think the number needs to be set. It's going to be upwards of $4 million for that. probably between 4.3 and 4.7. And I think we need to figure out those adjustments to our budgets so that we can strive to continue to keep the levy flat and also fully fund our pension. I think we can do that. I would argue, I don't think this is the year to increase our reserve above 16.6. I've spoken with folks at different finance experts who feel that that number in percent is fine to absorb any potential shocks next year. I don't think this is the year next year to start increasing it. So that would bring in additional funding for us. So I want to agree that I think we need to fully fund on the 100% path. And I think, again, we're looking at about between 4.3, 4.5 million towards the police and fire pension for next year. Thank you.
Further discussion? Well, with no one else requesting to speak for the first time, Councilmember Burns with 4.5 minutes left.
Go ahead. You can go ahead.
Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you. This is related to Councilmember Burns's question about the Northwestern Stadium. How much revenue do we expect to lose during the construction project? If we're looking at estimating, an estimate of $10 million in permit fees.
And if I go by the last year's number, we got roughly $850,000 in football revenues, parking tax and that. And then indirect revenue of sales tax, liquor tax, so I would easily say extra 100,000 more. So upward of 900,000, yeah.
10 million becomes 9 million net.
Right.
Which is coming.
Times 2 seasons.
Times 2 seasons.
Yes.
So 8 million. Yes. And whether that's at the end of next year or into 2024, we don't know. Right. But to what extent can we plan around having that money at some point, even though we don't know exactly when it's coming?
I mean, I will defer it to the mayor, city manager, if someone knows better than, us, they're okay if we have some kind of guidance from the Northwestern. I'm glad to, if you think that we would get the money even by the year end, and if the city council directs us, we would be glad to include it in our projected revenues for 23.
I would respectfully suggest there's a lot of question marks right now, and I think it's a mistake to book that.
That makes sense to me. I'm good.
Back to Councilmember Burns with 4.5 left.
Forgot my question. So I'm going to hold. Who spoke before I said I wanted to talk? Was that with you, Councilmember?
That was Councilmember Kelly.
What were you talking about? That'll probably help me. Yeah, what was...
So I would like to see the city begin now in 23 fully funding our police and fire pension obligation at 100%, so that we're going to be at 100%, which would mean obviously allocating a couple $1 million more towards our pension obligation. And I think we should look at still striving to keep the levy flat if possible, but I would concur with Mr. Livingston that that would be a reason to potentially exceed, to raise our levy if need be, but I think we should strive to keep it flat with the kind of cuts that we're going to look at when we examine the CIP budget. But I would also advocate for keeping our reserve at 16.6 next year.
There it is, reserve. Why 20% and not 16.6%? So I was talking to City Manager Stowe earlier, who gave the best, at least single explanation, as if we were at 20% funded during COVID, we wouldn't have had to lay off as many positions. I was like, that makes some sense. Not so sure that change alone would result in a more improved bond rating. But being able to not lay people off is a good reason to so I want to know more about, one is, do you agree with that we might have, is that the reason why we had to lay off so many people?
I mean, you mentioned all 3 or 4 reasons, I think. The rating agency, the other thing, we don't have to lay off, cut down the service levels, and I think we have our budget manager who came from Schaumburg, and they could sail through it because of the 40% fund balance policy. So no layoffs, no service cuts, so we could keep that service, sometimes the service level, because sometimes if we lay off the people, service is kind of tied into that in a direct proportion. So bond rating. Every year, my experience, 4 or 5 years here in Evanston and my previous job as a finance director, rating agencies, they look at it. And particularly a couple of times, yes, they have made a comment that, okay, why you are below 16.66, which is a city adopted goal. And I said, we had some rough years and whatnot. So yes, but we are striving, city council is conscious about this thing because we bring it up, they know about it. And so, yes. And obviously based on that, yeah, that's one of the factors which is considered, if we go out for a line of credit, the banks or others, rating agencies for our bond purpose. And even if you get extra 10 basis points, because if we lose the rating or if we improve our rating because of these kind of good things, home rule community is considered a good thing because we have a lot of flexibility in terms of revenues, so which is a big plus, And they talk about the strong financial management in their final report from S&P and others. So if we improve, if it all helps to improve our rating by one notch, and which could cut down 10, 20 basis points in our interest cost, it's millions of dollars over the life of the debt, So yes, it has a thing, but one thing which I would say, yes, can we go to 40% Schaumburg-Niles? You heard Evanston Public Library that they are at 4 to 6 months. Even after they would use some of the reserves this year, they would be somewhere around 35%. So yeah, it has a lot of those things, and it establishes or kind of gives you assurance that their services would be there, If it's just because we lose $1 million or $2 million, like in Northwest, and I'm glad it is compensated by a high amount of things. But, and yes, Evanston sometimes can take this kind of hits because we have a larger revenue base.
Thank you.
So I actually got to follow up with a pension question because there's been so much pension conversation. There were two aspects of the state pension formula that were flagged as potentially kind of dumb. One was the 90%, right? The formula says we're supposed to get to 90% by 2040. The point is, hey, 100% seems to be all. So that's one. The other is a little bit more complicated, but maybe worth spending 30 seconds explaining. Our calculation doesn't actually take as an input the number of dollars in the pension fund. It takes as an input some other complicated thing because the number of dollars fluctuates, it can be volatile, and so they do something called smoothing, which is to say they do like a 5-year rolling average that means that if we have a really bad year like this year, that's not all priced into what we would pay. So we would pay some number that kind of feels low compared to what somebody just looking at the asset value would conclude. And the price that we pay for putting in that smaller number of dollars is, hey, next year we'll put in more, and the year after we'll put in more, and the year after we'll put in more, and so on and so forth. On the flip side, if we have a really good year, it doesn't drop our contribution as much as you might expect. So those are two things in the state law that are kind of, you might criticize. The first one, the 100 versus 90, would always result in us paying more. The second one, the so-called smoothing, would certainly in a year like this result in us paying more. My question is, the Blue Ribbon panel and the history kind of shows that since 2008, the city has often endeavored to put in more than the state mandated minimum. Was that more? Was that that larger number that we put in basically voluntarily to do the right thing based on a correction of a formula, or was just kind of we'll throw in a little bit more as we can because we understand the state's rules are kind of dopey?
Right. So yes, you're right that the whole process started in Evanston when so many other communities were, I think, never thought about it in 2008 Blue Ribbon Committee, And if you look at the even last 10, 12 years, the investment rate assumption, right now we're at 6.5, 6.75. I remember in 18, I think when I came here, Evanston was using 6.75. teachers' retirement system at the state level was using 8.25. I mean, it's a big difference. If I would have used 8.25, suddenly our funding would be 75%, 80%. So yes, and even to the same council, some of them are here. One of our previous actuary came here and said, okay, what level of funding you need? I can make it happen right now. So it's like that, yes. We will use 8%, 8.5%, and yeah, you are at 75. So yes, you're right. But Evanston has consistently used, after they realized in the past that yes, this is a problem we need to address, but at the same time, I mean, they were struggling with the tax levy, because what happens is, like suppose if you tell me just do it, give $5 million, where is it coming from? Okay, we'll have to levy 5. That's how we do that. We levy for fire and police pension.
Are you saying that when Evanston has put in more than necessary, that what that meant was we were using a lower discount rate than we could have?
No, not using the, yes, we were using lower than 80% of the communities, or 90% even.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Mr. Livingston?
Just one follow-up point on that. When people talk about the assumed rate of return, you're really talking about the discount rate, right? That is.
I'm sorry, can you start again?
When people refer to their assumed rate of return on their assets, the implication of that is the discount rate that's used to discount the liabilities. So it's really, that's why a higher rate reduces the present value of the pension liability, which makes it look artificially, I would say, better funded. So I think it's not so much a discussion about what's a reasonable rate of return on our assets. Hopefully we will, especially after a bad year, make 8.5% or some higher number going forward. But I would argue that would not be the appropriate number then to really get a current view on what the future value of all of our real dollars that we'll pay out of pension is. So, and Hitesh and I have had that, conversation. So 6.5% is some degree of conservatism, for sure. Some would argue that's still high, but anyway.
Council Member Kelly with 3.5 minutes left.
So, I think it would be helpful too for residents and for council to see how the debt has grown over the years as a result of, really, we've been on 90 for the most part path, and just to understand what happens when you essentially don't pay interest on a large chunk of that money. And I think that would then resonate and people would understand better, and I hope hopefully this whole council, why it's so important that we start making those payments towards 100% immediately. That the likelihood that 100,000, suggest 100 million by 2040, I don't know, but I think that if folks saw how it has been increasing over the years as a result of not paying on 100% fully funding it, I think everybody would agree. I think every resident would agree that we need to start doing this now. And I think it's worth mentioning, there is even an effort, and I agree, I think that was not a good thing that the state did to create that 90%. There's even an effort now to reduce it to 80% and to even extend it out more another 20 years. This would be horrible for municipalities if municipalities latched onto that. So anyway, I hope we'll all get on board with fully funding this year, start on that path, and start making that a regular part of our budget proposals for every year. Thank you.
Are there further questions or comments? All right, and then seeing none, I'll just add a few comments of my own. Just in full transparency, I'm not sure where I stand on the 100% versus 90% question. What I do think is important to acknowledge is that the state's formula is not adequate. We should be going beyond what we're obligated to pay. I agree with Councilmember Kelly that it's not a good policy idea being recommended by others to drop the number and extend out the deadline, but I have a high degree of confidence that almost all municipalities will be lobbying furiously for that, not against it. So that's just sort of the direction these things go. And then finally, just on the broader budget, I want to thank all the time that went into and the effort that went into collecting all the information, ideas, and putting this budget together. That said, I'm not able to support the budget that was published on the website, and I just wanted to be transparent and explain why. As was discussed, it proposes a property tax increase, and it proposes to essentially dip into reserves and also use some ARPA funding to achieve balance. And I think a situation where all of that is necessary has got to come with real serious evidence that we've done everything we can to find every possible saving and efficiency. And I don't think that is then consistent with the expansion in staff that is being proposed. So obviously this is only a starting point. There's been a lot of really constructive feedback, but I did think it was important in the interest of transparency just to share my own view of where we are and the direction that I hope we can head in the coming weeks as these conversations continue. So again, thanks to everybody. I think we had really important conversations. There's a lot left to come. Thanks to everybody in council for your engagement with this. It's going to be a really, really critical time for us all to share our views and make sure we can coalesce around something that really works for the whole community. And that brings us to call of the wards. Councilmember Revelle.
Well, I just would like to acknowledge the recent passing of a really remarkable Evanstonian, Bernice Weisbord, who was just such a pioneer in helping everybody recognize the importance of investment in early childhood education, the years 1 to up to 3 years old, and providing support that families need to be able to provide the nurturing and stability that they need to help their children succeed. She was obviously the founder of Family Focus here in Evanston, but her impact was, here in Evanston, it was in Chicago, it was nationally as well. So she's she lived a really full, wonderful life, and we all are the benefit of that. And then following on the theme of budgets, I will be co-hosting a budget meeting with Councilmember Herackaris and Councilmember Suffredin on November 1st, I think is the date. Yep.
Councilmember Herackaris.
There will be a 9th Ward meeting on October 26th at 7:30. And I will also be at the October 26th budget town hall in Espanol at the Levy Center. So look forward to seeing people there.
Councilmember Kelly.
Ward meeting this Thursday, the 20th, and the budget team will be with us to discuss budget and to hear your input. So I encourage everyone, or encourage your friends if they're going to attend, to either watch this meeting this evening and or take a good look at the budget before our ward meeting this Thursday. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Second Ward Council meeting, October 27th at Robert Crown. There will be daycare available, and we will have the budget team there to also talk about the budget and discuss it. And then the next meeting will be November 29th.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Well, I'd like to echo the comments that Councilmember Revelle made about Bernice Weisbord. She was really a giant in the field, and we were very fortunate to have her here in Evanston. For announcements, there will be a joint budget meeting with the 3rd and 4th wards at the 4th ward meeting on Tuesday, November 1st at Robert Crown. So for 3rd warders, we're going to hear together with the 4th warders about the budget at the November 1st meeting.
7 p.m.
7 p.m., yes.
Councilmember Nisba.
What Councilmember Nguyen just said. See you all on Tuesday, November 1st.
Councilmember Burns.
I also want to express my condolences to Bernice Weisbord, which was expressed that she was one of the founders of Family Focus, which is, I would say, the only social service hub in the city of Evanston, and that not only does Family Focus provide programming there, but they are landlord to several other social service providers and it is truly an amazing center. I think the recent merger with Child Care Society, a Chicago organization, honors Bernice's contributions. I think the $3 million that we approved for Family Focus honors that legacy as well as the tenants who are still there and committed to the building and the cause. I also want to announce a joint meeting, budget meeting on the 27th with the 8th Ward. It will start at 7:15 p.m. And following the budget discussion, we'll have a 5th Ward meeting where we'll also discuss zoning and our upcoming comprehensive plan. There's a reparations town hall meeting that will be hosted by Second Baptist Church and the Reparations Committee on October 22nd. And then also I invite folks who are interested in supporting the city and finding ways to support our minority, women-owned and Evanston-based businesses to attend the next NWEBE committee meeting on October 19th, where we will develop its first annual work plan, where we'll talk about ways to, I'll talk about some of the goals. We'll talk about ways to increase local firms that provide goods and services for the city of Evanston. We'll discuss how to increase local contractors that work as general contractors and subcontractors on major projects in Evanston, the Northwestern football stadium being one, along with other considerations. And that is all. Thank you.
Councilmember Sufferton. That concludes call of the wards, and now Councilmember Newsome is recognized to make a motion.
Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes 120/2A, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss agenda items regarding personnel, setting the price of sale or lease of property owned by the city, and the establishment of reserves or settlement of claims. Litigation. As well as, I'm sorry, let me start over. I read last week's list. The list is including the purchase or use of real property, setting the price or sale of lease or property owned by the city, and litigation. These agenda items are permitted subjects to be considered in executive session and are enumerated exceptions under the Open Meetings Act as set forth in 5 ILCS 120/2A, sections 5, 6, and 11. Thank you.
Councilmember Newsome moves that we resolve into an executive session. Councilmember Nguyen seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakatis.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Yes.
Yes. Councilmember Newsome.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns. And Councilmember Sufferton is no longer on the Zoom.
With 7 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries. And at 8:47 p.m., the council resolves into an executive session to begin immediately in the council member library.